Hi, Joe Wenberg, Bloomberg Summer 4. I've been saying it for a long time. I want to do some stuff on Western civilization, Western thought, and the Western world. And I've been procrastinating, because it's just such a big topic. It really is. And, I believe that I needed to get a huge bucket of information about the ancient world. And I did limit that over time to just the world of the Greeks and the world of the Romans. And from those two civilizations, we get the preponderance of the foundations of Western thought, the concepts that are part and parcel of Western civilization. But the Greeks, of course, we have the philosophers, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and it, they are a little difficult to penetrate, but that's where we get our ideas from. Those folks, essentially, we're talking like 400 BC. We're talking Plato. A little later for Aristotle. And of course, in much of Plato's writing, he made it out that he was having a dialogue with Socrates. So what we come down to is that there's really not much written by Socrates that at least I'm aware of. There may be, I just don't know. But we have all of that, and there's a ton of it. And then Aristotle, considered by many to be the father of but the father of the scientific method. He promoted the concept of doing investigations, doing inquiry. I don't want to go so far as saying doing experiments, but the scientific method was being promoted by Aristotle. And the way I see it is that if you just were aware of everything that they were promoting, you'd already have everything about Western civilization, because the Romans leaned on those guys to come up with their own philosophies. Now, the Romans may not have leaned on them for their systems of law. Roman law seems to be unique to Roman law. So, but there were a couple of, giants in the world of philosophies. There was Seneca and there was Cicero. Seneca, I believe, was more a man of antiquity, and Cicero was more like from a little bit before the turn from BC to AC, a little bit before, a little bit after. That's where he was active. And I want to say it's Seneca who looked back to Plato and Aristotle and developed ideas. Now, why is this important? Well, it's important because Roman law became the basics for a lot of law that was being promoted in the Western world, early on and clear on through. But, and perhaps maybe more important, the Roman civilization gave us the Romance language, which resulted in the creation of about 5 or 6 languages. You think of French, you think of Italian, Portuguese, Spanish, and many, many words are right from the what they quote unquote vulgar Latin, which would mean everyday Latin. And so we had that great advantage that we were able to communicate with the vast regions as we moved, as the Romans built their empire. And the other thing that's important to note is that their naming of so many sites throughout Europe is still with us today. And I'm not just talking about the big cities, but also landmarks that are unknown to the most of the world. You know, maybe there's a bridge or a road that for the locals in those parts of Western Europe, and this, you know, basically we're talking Gaul, which is basically France, Germany, and then spread into England. You know, these were Latin words for a bridge or a place, and they stayed with us till the current day. So Rome, and Rome was also, you know, key in bringing civil engineering to the fore. They were great road builders. They were great great builders of large structures. The Greeks had their large structures too, but I believe when all is said and done, the Romans were much more active in that regard. Now, what else might these two ancient cultures have brought to us and made them worthy for our study? Of course, with the Greeks, there's a lot of literature they brought forward. You know, they were very fond of plays, and those plays are still, to a certain extent, performed to this day. The Romans, I can't really say that I'm aware of their inroads into the dramatic field. You know, I think that they mimic the Greeks quite a lot. So probably they had their plays too. The long and the short of it is, in my mind, if you're interested in Western civilization, Western Europe, it's fine enough to get the general drift of the Greek world in those back in those days, 400, 500 BC, 300 BC, and a general drift of the Roman world, 100 BC, 300, 400 AD, covering that spans of history. You get a general idea of what was going on, general idea of the various Caesars having their warfare against the barbarians, and how they would use those barbarians to nourish and build their empire. And if you have that, if you get a general sense of what was going on, then it's time to turn your attention to essentially what I believe, and I haven't checked this lately. Actually, not stuff I'm talking about. I haven't checked it lately, but the Middle Ages then crop up, and that would be something like 500 AD to about 12, the 12th to 13th century, and that's your Middle Ages, and that's where a lot of development starts, a lot, and concepts like towns and cities, the aristocracies, the the guild systems, lots of things come to the fore in the Dark Ages, which to me is kind of misrepresenting the whole thing when they say the Dark Ages, but that's what they call them. So what am I going to do? Fight with City Hall? No. But I mean, let's face it. We had church history growing leaps and bounds. In the first part of the Common Era, it hadn't been settled out what this newfangled religion, Christianity, was going to be. It was quite a lot of jockeying for position. But once you get into the Dark Ages, the cardinals and the bishops started to secure their position, and people were pretty confident that when they got on the Christian side of things, they were getting on the right bandwagon. Now, of course, Jewish tradition had been around since forever too, and that was the right bandwagon for a lot of other people. And of course, you have to factor in this during the Dark Ages, around 700 AD, actually 600 and change AD, the Islamic world rises up, and within no time at all, they take storm, and they're conquering the world left and right. Yet, it's the old idea of biting off more than you can chew. So they essentially did that, and by 900 AD, 750, 850, 800 AD, somewhere in there, they were beat back by the kings and the barons and what have you of France and that part of Europe. Put a stop to them, beat them back, and that situation became rather static until Ferdinand and Isabel, the king and queen of Spain, defeated them in a number of wars and then banished them from their lands. And the banishment, didn't make them disappear. Essentially, they just got stronger in other places, like North Africa, Algiers, and such. So we're building a new world in the Dark Ages. The pomp and circumstance of the Christian religion grows leaps and bounds. The all-encompassing religion was there to organize and ensure conformity with every piece of an individual's life. And the people, this is what they know, and they believed it wholeheartedly, which in a way, many people have said that they were in good shape because they really thought, up there there's a God and he's taking care of us. We don't have to worry. Which, in the world we live in today, which is basically a non-God based world, and you can give me all the numbers you want about the billions and billions of Christians and Islamic types, they basically don't have that same attachment to a God in heaven that people had in the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, and so on. And the people who think they do, and so fine, all power to them. I don't think they do, but they're not. They don't know what it was like to be living in, particularly the Middle Ages, when everything you did was wrapped up in a Christian theology of one sort or another. And you know, at the same time all this is going on, you have that other huge culture, the Orientals, down there in the Far East, with their concepts of religion, God, and the making sure that people were in line with the concepts of God that were promoted by the emperors and the high-standing individuals of any of those Oriental empires that went on since before 2000 BC. And then there would be changes, sometimes after only a couple of hundred years, sometimes after 500 years, but there would be changes to those empires and in the Orient. And this is getting away from Western civilization. But the point here is not to think that while all this Western civilization is growing by leaps and bounds, that the rest of the world was static. It absolutely was not. It absolutely was not. So what we have is basically a world that is very dynamic, very dynamic. And don't kid yourself that what you're living in today is the only dynamic civilization that ever was. Not so, just not so. Here we are in the Middle Ages, where in a way where our eyes are being opened, the veil is lifting. We start to see that things are made to a disadvantage of the people, and yet they don't know anything else but having been dominated by powerful kings and lords and barons and all that sort of thing. But the tide is moving, the waters are rising, and then you get something as significant as the Magna Carta in 1215, getting towards the High Middle Ages, where the barons forced the king to relinquish certain rights and privileges that only he had. He gave up some of those rights and privileges to the barons. He couldn't be the one and only. He had to share power with the barons after 1215. Now, and this is one of those good points where when you're getting your primary education, they make Magna Carta out to be the cure-all and the cure-all and fix whatever that saying is to for the average person who now has some sort of sharing in the ruling of his country. It's absolutely not true. All Magna Carta did was transfer some rights from the king to the barons, and to boot, those rights were vigorously fought against, or vigorously, wanted to make sure they got relinquished and sent back to the king, right soon on. So you make Magna Carta out to be a big deal, and perhaps it is. But the long and the short of it is that the people had a long way to go before they were going to get any sharing in the activities of the world, the activities that mattered. In other words, who was going to march on what other country, who was going to declare war, who was going to do all these things that had so much meaning and caused so much reaction to how the world sat on itself. What was this going to be like? But it was a gradual step, and every time I think of this, I always come up with the same thing. It had to be gradual. If you try to do this overnight, it would be chaos and nothing would ever get done. So it was very gradual. We pushed towards more freedom. In the meantime, the life of the average citizen in those worlds was practically horrendous. They had little to eat. They had no status. They had very little status. They were essentially puppets of all the higher classes. Just, you better do what you're being told to do. Otherwise, you're going to be out of the picture. It wasn't, in any way, shape, or form, it wasn't a pretty place to live in. Whether it was the Dark Ages or the Middle Ages. It was not a pretty place to live in. And as they pushed out of the Middle Ages, something like the 13th century, they start getting into the Renaissance. That's where, in my estimation, Western civilization tries to correct things, tries to become more humanitarian. Humanism kicks in. A lot of social philosophers start writing big volumes about the status of man, and that takes years and years and years. And now we're at a time, and I'm not cutting this dialogue off short. Western civilization talking on. Hopefully, it's going to go on for a long time. But now we're at a point where an individual like me can get up and speak his mind, and a bunch of soldiers clad in armor and carrying spears are not going to come crashing through my door. Oh, somebody's at the door. What's that? Listen, it's not going to happen, So we've come a long ways, and listen, there's so much of this history of this world. There's just so much, and if you haven't jumped into it, foot, line, and sinker, or whatever they say, you haven't jumped into it big time. Don't wait too long. Don't wait till you're looking at entrance through the pearly gate, because it'll be too late for you to enter there, because there's too much to know. Too much to know. So, at that, I'm going to say bye. I'm going to keep trying to equip myself with new and more things to say about Western civilization. It's a long story, and it's worth telling. Okay then, bye-bye.